Okay, so you're here and you want to speak English, right? More fluently and with like real confidence.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what you shared with us, right? In your notes to us. And that's really what we are focusing on in this deep dive, unlocking that potential for you.
Absolutely.
We've looked at a lot of the learning strategies you've been kind of, exploring, and we've looked at that really interesting article about how our brains adapt to new languages,
Fascinating stuff.
It really is. And our mission here is really simple: to give you the absolute most effective tips for you to, quickly and naturally improve your spoken English.
Right.
And we're drawing all this directly from the resources that you shared with us, right?
Sure.
So let's just get straight to it. And I think a good place to start is something really fundamental that you brought up in your notes. And then that was the idea of actually thinking in English.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's something that, as that article you shared highlighted, one of the initial hurdles in achieving fluency is this persistent habit of translating.
Right.
Internal translation.
Right.
So you hear English and you translate it in your head, you formulate a response, but in your first language, and then you have to translate that back into English.
Right. Yeah.
Like this bottleneck,
Yeah.
That can make spoken English feel hesitant and a bit unnatural.
Right. Yeah.
And so what's really fascinating here, and what a lot of the neuroscience is suggesting, is that by actually making a conscious effort to think in English,
Right.
you start to actually shift your neural pathways.
Wow.
And you start to create more direct links between concepts and English words.
Okay.
So ultimately, you can kind of bypass those slower translation circuits.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. So, I guess let's unpack that a little bit. Like, how do we actually start doing that? How do we actually begin to think in English? Because it sounds like a huge leap,
It does. But it's a very gradual process,
Okay.
And it is something that can be trained.
Okay.
The key is to just start small and be consistent.
Okay.
A really effective way to begin, and this is something that several of the resources you looked at kind of emphasized, is to just consciously describe your surroundings in English.
Okay.
So like right now, wherever you're listening to this, take a moment, look around you. What do you see?
Okay. Yeah.
But instead of just passively observing, actually mentally label everything in English.
Mm-hmm.
So desk, chair, window, lamp,
Right.
whatever you see.
And that really connects with what you were highlighting, in your notes to us. It's almost like you're building direct associations.
Exactly.
Right? Like you're creating a new dictionary in your brain where English words are connected to the actual things.
Precisely.
Without needing to go through your first language,
Yeah, exactly. And you can expand this beyond just naming, objects.
Okay.
Try planning simple parts of your day, in English.
Mm-hmm.
So like when you wake up in the morning, think to yourself, okay, first I need to brush my teeth.
Right.
Rather than thinking it in your first language and then translating it.
Right. Right.
And you can do this as you go through your day.
Mm.
Just narrate your actions, but do it in English silently.
Yeah.
So I'm making coffee, I'm getting dressed, I'm checking my email.
So it's like even those little like internal conversations we all have,
Yeah.
can actually become like English practice.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Like, if you're walking to the store, you could be thinking, I'm walking down the street, the sun is shining, I need to remember to buy milk and bread.
Exactly. The more you engage in this kind of like internal silent conversation in English, the more your brain gets used to just operating directly in the language.
Yeah.
You start to bypass that translation stage.
Wow.
And that leads to faster processing. And when you actually speak, it makes sentence formation so much more automatic.
Right. Okay.
So just think of it less as actively converting between languages.
Right.
And more as just using English for your everyday thoughts.
Right. Wow. That's a really good point. So that mental shift like really sounds like it could be powerful. Now another point that came up a lot in the things you were looking at was the importance of actually like getting those words out there, speaking.
Yes.
Right? Because you can think in English all you want, but you need to be able to speak it.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And that leads us to our next key strategy, which really goes hand in hand with this idea of consistent practice that you were talking about. And that's this: speak every single day, even if you're on your own. Think of speaking like a muscle.
Oh,
If you want to become stronger, if you want to be more agile, if you want to be able to express your thoughts smoothly,
yeah.
you need to exercise it, regularly.
Regularly.
And even if you don't have like a conversation partner
Yeah.
readily available, there's still so many ways for you to practice.
Okay. So tell me more. Like, what kind of solo speaking exercises are the most effective?
Well, one very effective technique, and it's something that's recommended in a lot of language learning resources, is recording yourself.
Okay.
And I know this might feel a little awkward at first, but it can be incredibly insightful. Just talk about your day, your thoughts, or even read aloud from an English text.
Okay.
And then listen back to yourself.
Right.
And when you do this, you start to become more aware of your own pronunciation patterns.
Right.
The areas where you hesitate, where you might stumble, and the things that you want to improve.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a bit scary, I guess, hearing your own voice.
It can be, yeah.
But I can see how valuable that would be, to really pinpoint the areas to improve. What other solo speaking techniques are good?
Another fantastic method is shadowing.
Okay.
And this has actually been studied quite a bit. You basically listen to a native English speaker. You can do this through YouTube videos, movies, audiobooks.
Right.
And then you immediately repeat what they're saying,
Yeah.
trying your best to copy their tone, their intonation, their pronunciation. Intonation is that kind of melody of their voice, how it goes up and down.
Oh, okay.
And it really helps you develop a feel for the natural rhythm of spoken English.
So it's not just repeating the words, but it's really trying to get that way it sounds.
Exactly, yeah. You're internalizing these natural speech patterns.
Okay.
And then there's self-conversation. It sounds a bit strange, but it can be really effective.
Okay.
So stand in front of a mirror and just talk to yourself in English.
In English, okay.
Ask yourself questions. How was my day? What are my goals for this week? What am I looking forward to?
Right. Yeah.
And answer them out loud.
Oh.
It might feel a little unusual at first, I know.
Yeah.
But it's a really low pressure way to practice just forming those sentences and making speaking feel more natural. And this actually brings up a good point. Thinking about your current routine.
Yeah.
How often are you actively engaging in this speaking?
Yeah.
Even when no one else is around?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a really good point to consider. Because, we can get caught up in learning all the grammar rules and new vocabulary.
Yeah.
But actually speaking, we kind of forget about that.
Easy to overlook that, yeah.
Now, I guess when you start speaking, I guess, where should you focus? Like, is it all about just learning more and more words, like accumulating a big vocabulary?
It's a part of it, but it's not the whole picture, While building your vocabulary is important,
Yeah.
a more efficient and immediately useful approach
Yeah.
is to focus on learning phrases,
Okay.
chunks of language,
Right.
rather than just isolated words. Because think about it, in real conversations, we rarely just speak in single words.
Right. Yeah.
We use combinations of words.
Right. Phrases.
Exactly. Phrases. We communicate in phrases. And knowing just one word on its own might not be enough for you to express what you want to say smoothly.
Okay. I get it. So, I mean, can you give like specific examples of how learning phrases can make a difference for our listener?
Of course.
Yeah.
So instead of just memorizing the adjective difficult, try to learn a whole phrase like, that was a tough decision.
Yeah.
So when you need to express that something was really challenging, you have this ready-made phrase that sounds natural.
That's really good.
Yeah.
That's a really good example.
It's much more useful in conversation than just knowing the word difficult on its own.
Right.
Right.
It's like having those pre-assembled like building blocks. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Of conversation instead of having to like put every little piece together every time.
Exactly. Think about those common expressions that you use all the time in your first language.
Right.
Make an effort to learn how native English speakers express the same ideas.
Okay.
So, for example, instead of just learning the word hungry, aim to learn I'm starving.
Okay. Yeah.
Or instead of just happy, try I'm over the moon.
Right.
And instead of thank you, try I really appreciate it.
Right. Okay.
And these little changes, these native sounding phrases, they instantly make your English sound more fluent
Yeah.
and more expressive.
Right.
And you don't have to pause and think about each individual word.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's a really good tip. I like that a lot. Now, we've talked about thinking in English. We've talked about speaking. What about listening?
Listening. This is absolutely essential. In fact, achieving fluent speaking is really, really closely tied to developing really good listening skills.
Okay.
As you listen more attentively to English, your ear becomes more and more tuned to the sounds of the language. The natural rhythm, the intonation patterns.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this heightened auditory awareness,
Right.
it massively improves your pronunciation.
Wow.
It improves your understanding of grammar, but in natural context, right?
Right.
And it helps you absorb new vocabulary much more effortlessly.
So it's not just passively hearing it, it's really actively listening.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You have to consciously immerse yourself in English audio.
Okay.
So listen to English podcasts
Okay.
and pick topics that actually interest you,
Right. Yeah.
Because that will keep you engaged.
Okay.
Watch movies and TV shows
Mm-hmm.
and pay attention to the language,
Yeah.
how they're speaking. Even try to tune into conversations that you might overhear in public.
Okay.
It's almost like bathing your brain in the sounds of English.
Right. Wow. Are there any particular listening techniques that you found to be especially helpful?
Yeah. One effective approach is to listen to the same material multiple times,
Okay.
but each time focus on different aspects. So you might focus on the pronunciation one time,
Right.
then you might focus on the vocabulary another time.
Right. Okay.
You could also try listening at different speeds. So you start with slower paced content, and then as your comprehension improves, gradually increase that speed.
Okay. Yeah.
It's challenging, but it really helps you to process the language more efficiently. Also, pay really close attention to how the speakers use intonation and rhythm. Which words they emphasize,
Right.
how their tone changes.
Okay.
And a powerful technique is to try and repeat short sentences
Okay.
exactly as you hear them.
Right. Okay.
It's like another form of shadowing, but for listening.
Yeah.
And it really reinforces your pronunciation and your rhythm.
Right.
And importantly, make sure you listen to different English accents, American, British, Australian,
Right. Right.
because this will make you so much more adaptable when you meet different speakers in real life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture of language learning, listening provides the raw input
Right.
that feeds your speaking abilities.
Yeah. That makes total sense. So you really need to hear it to speak it. Right.
Exactly.
Now we've talked a lot about kind of individual practice, but what about talking to other people? Right.
That's the next step in the journey.
Okay.
So while solo practice builds a good foundation, it's really interacting with real people that takes it to that next level.
All right.
It gives you those opportunities for spontaneous conversation, right?
Yeah.
And it gives you immediate feedback on your language.
Right.
And you get to use English for real.
Yeah.
And so joining online speaking communities can be fantastic, especially if you don't have many English speakers around you.
Okay. So where would you recommend our listener look for these communities?
So there's several platforms that are specifically designed for language exchange. So websites and apps like Tandem or HelloTalk.
Right.
And they connect you directly with native English speakers who are learning your native language.
Okay.
So it's mutually beneficial. You help each other.
Okay.
There's also loads of English learning groups on Facebook and other social media where learners from all over the world can connect.
Right.
And don't forget about online meetups and virtual language exchanges. They're becoming more and more common these days.
Right. Yeah.
And if you're into gaming, many online games have voice chat.
Right.
So you can naturally converse with English speakers.
That sounds like a really fun way to practice.
It is.
Yeah.
And what's really amazing is just the sheer variety of these online avenues.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're very accessible.
Okay. And that sounds like a really good way to, practice without too much pressure.
Definitely.
Now, we touched on mimicking native speakers when we were talking about shadowing earlier.
Yeah.
But I want to kind of delve a little deeper into that. How do you master imitation? What are the actual techniques to really get good at that?
So mastering imitation is such a powerful technique.
Yep.
And it can really speed up your progress.
Yeah, okay.
And it goes beyond just, parrot fashion repeating.
Right.
It's about consciously absorbing how they pronounce things, their intonation, their rhythm.
Yeah.
And if you're working with video, you can even, look at their body language.
Wow.
So you're trying to really embody how a native speaker communicates.
Right. Wow. Okay. So what's the best way to practice this?
So shadowing is a big part of this. We talked about that earlier.
Right.
Choose a scene from a movie or a YouTube clip, with natural, clear English.
Okay.
and listen to a sentence or two. And then try to repeat it, paying attention to how they pronounce each word, where they emphasize.
Okay.
The flow, the cadence of their speech.
Right.
A step-by-step method can be really helpful. So watch the segment once without trying to copy.
Right.
Then go back, listen to one sentence at a time.
Pause it, repeat it.
Right.
And it can be helpful to record yourself speaking.
Okay.
And then compare your recording to the original so you can hear those differences.
Wow.
Over time, this really helps you to develop much more natural sounding speech patterns.
Okay.
And it really refines your pronunciation.
So it's really active and focused.
It is. It is.
Now, I know something that holds a lot of people back.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this, in your reflections to us.
Yeah.
And that's the fear of making mistakes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is so common. It's a huge barrier for a lot of language learners.
Right.
It can be paralyzing, really. And sometimes it even stops people from speaking at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But you need to reframe how you see these mistakes.
Okay.
So instead of seeing them as failures,
Right.
see them as essential steps
Okay.
on the path to becoming fluent.
Right.
Every mistake you make and then you learn from takes you closer to your goal. Okay. That's a good way to think about it. I mean, I know it's kind of easier said than done sometimes. Like intellectually is, it's fine to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But emotionally it can be hard.
It can be hard, yeah.
So how do you really overcome that fear?
I think one thing is to just remember that most native English speakers, they're very understanding.
Okay.
They really appreciate that you're making the effort to learn their language.
Yeah.
They know that mistakes are natural.
Right.
Everyone makes them.
Yeah.
And they're very unlikely to judge you harshly for it.
Right. Okay.
It's also really helpful to practice in supportive environments.
Okay.
So, a patient tutor.
Right.
Or a language partner.
Yeah.
Someone who understands the challenges.
Right.
They can help you feel comfortable making those mistakes. And the more you speak, the more comfortable you'll become.
Right.
That fear will just start to naturally disappear. The key is to remember that by avoiding mistakes,
Yeah.
you're actually stopping yourself from improving
That's a really good point.
because you're not getting the practice you need.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really good. Really, really good advice. Okay. So we've covered thinking in English, speaking regularly, focusing on phrases, actively listening, getting out there with online communities, mastering imitation,
Yeah.
and not being afraid to make those mistakes. What else? What other tools and strategies can our listener use?
Well, we're in the digital age now.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of resources out there, specifically for language learners. You
Yeah.
should definitely be using those.
Okay.
There are so many apps that focus on pronunciation.
Okay.
Apps like Duolingo, SpeechLink, ELSA Speak.
Right.
These can really help you pinpoint where you need to make adjustments.
I've heard good things about those. Are there any other ways that technology can help?
Yeah, there's another really clever trick that I like to use, and it's using the voice-to-text feature that's available on pretty much every phone and computer now.
Right.
So just try speaking a sentence in English into your Notes app or something similar
Okay.
and see if it transcribes it correctly.
Okay.
It's a very quick way to get feedback on your pronunciation,
Right.
and you can identify those words and sounds that you might be mispronouncing.
Right. That's actually really clever.
It is, and it's so readily available and usually free.
Yeah. That's really good. Now, I guess, learning a new language,
Yeah.
it can be tough. It can be demanding.
It can be, yeah.
And so how do you stay motivated? How do you keep it engaging?
That's where the fun factor comes in. The more you enjoy the process, the more motivated you'll be,
Right.
and the more likely you are to stick with it
Okay.
and see progress. So you need to find ways to make learning English enjoyable.
Okay. So give us some specific fun ideas.
Think about your hobbies.
Right.
What do you enjoy?
Yeah.
Watch funny videos on YouTube, things that make you laugh.
Okay.
Play some word games, in English. There are tons of those available. Sing along to English songs.
Right.
Even if you don't understand all the lyrics, it's good for your rhythm and pronunciation.
Right. Okay.
Read books and articles,
Okay.
even comics
Yeah.
in English.
Yeah.
But pick topics that you're actually interested in
Okay.
when it feels like fun
Yeah.
and not like a chore,
Right.
it becomes much more engaging. You'll naturally want to do it.
Yeah. I really like that. It's about like integrating it into your life
Again, okay.
rather than it being this separate thing that you have to do, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like studying. Okay, I really like that. And finally, how do you track your progress? How do you know if it's working?
That's where setting goals comes in,
Yeah.
and tracking. So you need to have specific goals in mind. Otherwise, it's hard to know how far you've come.
Right.
And it's easy to lose motivation.
Yeah.
So set small, achievable goals.
Okay.
For example, aim to have a 5-minute conversation in English with a partner by the end of the month.
Okay.
Or, learn and use 3 new expressions every week.
So just break it down into smaller steps.
Exactly. And then keep a record of your progress.
Okay.
Use a journal, a spreadsheet, or just make a mental note.
Right.
And then celebrate those small wins.
Okay.
That will really help you to stay motivated.
Right. Okay, so I mean, this has been a really, really insightful deep dive. We've talked about a lot, and it's all been directly, related to your goals for improving your spoken English. So just to recap,
Yeah.
we've talked about thinking in English,
Yes.
speaking every day,
Yes.
learning phrases, not just words,
Yeah.
listening actively,
Right.
connecting with online communities, really working on imitation,
Yeah.
and not being afraid of those mistakes.
Yeah,
We talked about using technology,
Yeah.
keeping it fun,
Yeah.
and setting goals.
Pretty good.
So, I mean, that's a lot of really good advice, and it's all tailored to helping you speak English with more confidence.
Yes.
So thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
Now, I want to leave you with one final thought. We've covered a lot of different techniques, so take a moment and think about which ones feel the most accessible to you.
Yeah. Good idea.
Or the most interesting. That might be the best place for you to start on your journey to really speaking English more confidently.